yurt dışından bir başka konuğumuzu davet etmek istiyorum. Satın almacının ajandası üzerine konuşacak. Satın almanın katma değerli merkeze dönüşmesi üzerine konuşmaları için uluslararası satın alma danışmanı ve eğitmeni May I invite Omid Ghamami.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's really a pleasure. It's always great to go to new countries. I've done business with Turkey and in Turkey for many years. So really thank you again. My name is Omid Ghamami, and we're going to talk today about the CPO agenda. This is my life passion, which is transforming the procurement function. Today, the procurement function is viewed and treated as a cost center by the organization, like human resources and payroll and accounting and warehousing and things like this. Where I want us to go is I want us to be and be perceived as a value-added center of profit. So starting out here, I'll give you a little bit about my background. I have an MBA from the University of California, and I have a couple of businesses. One is Purchasing Advantage, and that's a consulting and training organization. I work domestically in the US with all of the 50 states and the chief purchasing officers, and then also with large Fortune 500 companies all over the world. I also am the lead, the CEO for the Center for Purchasing and Supply Chain Management Excellence, and that offers the CPSCM certification, Certified Purchasing and Supply Chain Manager. I'm a globally recognized author, trainer, speaker, professor. It seems wherever I go, a few people come up and say, we've been following you for years on the internet. I'm really thankful for that. When I started at Intel, where I spent 18 years, and I ended up eventually running their global corporate purchasing operations with a $16 billion scope, something very interesting happened. I started in that organization, and after a bachelor's degree in business and a master's degree in business, I did not take one course in procurement. I did not read one book in procurement. I did not read a chapter, a sentence, a word about procurement. My education did not prepare me. Over 25 years, in 25 countries now, I've asked over 30,000 people in our profession, how many of them plan to be in this career? How many of them knew coming out of high school they would get an education in procurement and then get a job in procurement? And over 25 years, 25 countries, 30,000 procurement professionals, only 8 people have told me they plan to be in the profession. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the only business profession on earth that was completely assembled by accident. And as a consequence of that, we've developed many, many practices that we've gotten better at, but they're the wrong practices. Many of us in the profession who've been there for 30 years do not have 30 years experience. They have 1 year experience 30 times, and they've gotten better at that 1 year experience. I had the same experience going into Intel, and I had to adapt and learn and do much of my research on my own from the outside. I've done thousands of hours of consulting, speaking, training in 25 plus countries, written a couple of books for our profession that have sold very well, over 50 hours television expert, purchasing industry expert on television appearances, have been hired by the 50 chief purchasing officers of the United States to do work with them a couple of times, regularly present. I'm asked to speak to the supply chain management master's program at Harvard University very frequently. And I also started the procurement program in the state of California. It's the only one out of 117 community colleges. I don't do it for the money, and I didn't do it for the money. I did it because somebody has to stop people from landing and purchasing by accident. I felt if I didn't do it and if I didn't create this curriculum, nobody would do it. We need to start planning for this profession so that we can have success. So with that, I want to share with you a slide, and this is perhaps the most important slide I have here. If I'm going to meet with the chief purchasing officer of a company, I show this slide, and sometimes it's the only slide I show them. This slide is what I call the funnel slide, but it also represents your life in procurement. Now, inside this room is about 600 chief purchasing officers and senior procurement directors. I want all of you to pay attention because this presentation will be eye-opening and this slide should be eye-opening for you. The width of this funnel represents time allocation, and the height or length of the funnel represents over time. And so on the left, what you have is a narrow time allocation, then suddenly the time allocation becomes very large. We live in a world in procurement where everything is urgent. Nobody ever says, buy this, but get it when you have time. Everything is urgent. And so we end up, when I say we, I mean your people, your large organizations inside the companies that you work. They have to buy things quickly as a consequence. And then what happens is you don't get to spend, you being your people, don't get to spend the kind of time they need or they should in preparation for that negotiation. And a line happens, and this is the most important line in procurement, because the day before this line happens, the supplier doesn't have your money. The day after this line comes, the supplier has your money. And everything changes when suppliers have your money. But the problem is, when we buy things quickly and then the supplier has your money, you inevitably end up buying goods and services. And you might say, of course. In my book and the way I do consulting and training, goods and services are the worst thing you can possibly have. And I'll explain why as we go through it. And as a consequence of buying things quickly and buying goods and services, we put contracts in place that are unfavorable. We negotiate things that are unfavorable. It may include a good price, but the total cost frequently has problems. But the funnel opens up and problems ensue, and the end user and the business units contact and say, this is wrong and that is wrong. We have quality problems, we have delivery problems, we have uptime problems. And then from there, your people become full-time firefighters. They're no longer doing negotiation planning. They're no longer doing supplier continuous quality improvement. They're no longer doing cost models. They spend, and hear me clearly, our profession around the world, in government and in the private sector, spends between 50 and 90% of every single day in unplanned activities. Every single day. And this here, if you peel all the layers of the onion, is the reason why. Now, what's the model that I'm pushing Fortune 500 companies and the government towards, and where do I want to see our profession? We need to turn this funnel upside down. We need to have the time allocation up front, and we need to have these things happen before the supplier has our money. Because after they have our money, the leverage shifts. There's no obligation for them to perform. There's no need for them to negotiate with you. And anything you ask for represents a modification to the contract. Anything new you ask for, or any performance enhancements, represents a modification to the contract, and you're in trouble. And so the key things we're going to look at is it starts with design for performance results. That means not buying goods and services, but buying performance results and making sure the demand is articulated in that way. Then it's designed for total cost and making sure then that demand was designed for total cost. Then it's investigative negotiations and value creation, which I'll be talking about this afternoon. That'll be the part 2 of this. And that entails understanding what the supplier uniquely needs and requires and looking for ways to make them successful other than money. And then there's total cost analysis, which you're very familiar with, and taking cost out of the supply chain, which I'm a big proponent of. I'm not a proponent of shoving costs down the supplier's throat year after year and calling that cost savings or our only cost saving strategy. And so today we're going to focus on 2 things. One is negotiating for performance results, and the other one is design for TCO. In the afternoon, I'll be talking about investigative negotiations and value creation. With negotiation for performance results, here's what I want you to know. And once again, hear me clearly. You will not find this anywhere on the internet. You will not find anybody, nobody in our profession who is talking about this, yet it is the cancer that is eating our profession alive. And how do I know? Because I go inside these companies in 25 countries and I see it over and over and over again. The number one problem that I see, the number one problem in procurement is that our people are buying goods and services instead of performance results. They buy things quickly, they buy goods and services. Goods and services is no guarantee of a positive outcome. Performance results changes that paradigm completely. Now we were talking about what it is that we're trying to accomplish. I'll tell you a number of stories here. There's one of your neighboring countries, kind of neighboring, has a smart city. In fact, it's a very high-tech country, and one company is really invested in this city. They wanted to make everything extremely advanced to be the state-of-the-art to show the world. This is a 64 square kilometer city. They only have 1 and 2 lane roads. In this city, they have more than 1,000 light poles. Now, they made a decision. The most advanced kind of light pole is what? It's LED. And so we're going to shift everything over to LED. The end user specified 125 watt light bulbs. They sent out the specification and they did a bid. They got a supplier. Over 1,000 light bulbs were changed out. But then something happened. All the 1 lane roads were too bright. It was causing a safety hazard. At the same time, all the 2 lane roads had very large dark spots in areas in between the roads. Another safety problem. This was an emergency, and they went racing to the supplier saying, "Why did you do this? What's wrong? Why didn't you? This is a huge problem. You need to fix it now." And the supplier said, "The reason you are having this problem is because of what you asked us to do. You asked us to put in a certain wattage of light bulbs. You were supposed to ask for lumens. Lumens describes the illumination that you need down low. Wattage is just wattage." And so now this organization found them in a huge issue. They had to again spend the money to go and change out over 1,000 light poles. And the supplier said, "You were supposed to tell us lumens, and then we would tell you what the wattage should be." So they started over, and they found out that the 1 lane roads should have 90 watt light bulbs, and the 2 lane roads should have 135 watt light bulbs. 90 watt light bulbs and 125 watt light bulbs that they asked for are not a performance result. It's goods and services. It's just a light bulb, but it caused endless problems because the performance result that they actually wanted was not 125 watts. The performance result they wanted was the proper illumination of the road. Failure to think this through causes endless problems in procurement. Then I'll go through another example. There was a city in the United States that was having more and more and more tourism. And so they had lots of people coming there. Next thing you know, all these people walking around with money with that came a pickpocketing problem, a theft problem, and people stealing money from people's wallets. So what did they do? The police said, "Okay, we need to put cameras on every street corner. We need to be able to capture this." Now, what did they do? They sent an entire department of engineers, these are your end users, to design a fiber optic network. And they designed the fiber optic network for the entire city. And by the time it was done, finally, after months, and they were ready to go out to bid, they found out they created a multi-million-dollar monster because fiber optics is extremely expensive. And this ended up coming out to about 10 times more than they had budget. Now, mind you, if they had budget, they would have done exactly this design, and it probably would have worked very well. But they ended up finally saying, "We can't do this design. The design probably works, but we can't do it." Why? Because we don't have the money. Now, I want you to pay attention. Fiber optics is not a performance result. It's a good. And with the installation, it's a service. It's not a performance result. And so they said, "Okay, well, our experts in-house said to do fiber optics, but we'll go out. Instead of doing an RFQ for this, we'll do an RFP and we'll put our design away." Well, one of the suppliers came back and said, "You don't need to do fiber optics." First of all, if I step back, they had to now, instead of asking for fiber optics, instead define what they wanted to accomplish. What did they want to accomplish? They wanted to make sure they had real-time footage that was transmitted to the police department so they could catch criminals in the act. And also they wanted archival footage so they could prosecute them. These are performance results, right? And so what happens next? They communicated this out to the vendor community and they said, you tell us. One of the vendors came back with a solution that said, you don't need fiber optics. We have the tallest building in town. It's a hotel. We can beam the signal down to the police station. Guess how much cost savings they got? 90% cost savings. And they would have never gotten this cost savings if they actually had the money for fiber optics. The problem was they were focusing on goods and services instead of performance results. Now, here is one of the most important slides you can have in procurement if you want to make this change or shift to buying performance results. We have sort of a continuum that we can engage with end users and with business units on. The first one is to focus on where they want to buy. And this is what they want to buy. This is where our end users want to focus. This is what they want to talk about, is what they want to buy. And keeping the discussion here is the root cause of all these problems in procurement, almost everything. Because you need to elevate the discussion and then talk not just about what is it you want to buy, how will it be used? Then the next question you need to ask is, what is the end result? And that is where you need to keep the focus, ladies and gentlemen, is what is the result that you are actually trying to accomplish. If you stay in that bottom rung, in that lowest section of this pyramid, you will have tremendous harmony with the end user because you will both be in agreement. You won't be arguing about what they want to buy. Now is the time to have healthy debate about what they want to accomplish because the supplier doesn't have your money yet. Now is the time to have these debates. Now is the time to make sure you get it right. And if you don't focus on this in advance of negotiations, you will eventually have to focus on it, but it will not be until the contract is in place and the supplier has your money, and it's very likely that the contract cannot help you at all, which is a terrible situation because what will have happened is the supplier did exactly what you asked them, but your end user is still unhappy. And that is the worst problem you can have in procurement because nothing can resolve the situation but more money. So there's 4 legs of the stool, and I'm very limited here in time I have. If I'm going inside with a company to help them with this, I'll spend 3 days on this topic with them before we dive into then transforming this within their organization. The 4 legs of the stool are, 1, there has to be pay-for-performance models, not pay for goods and services. Those are 2 very different things, but paying for performance. The next thing is you need to have predefined remedies. A remedy is a contractual term. It's not enough, and a remedy defines what it takes to make you whole again. Now, it's not enough to have a contract breach take place. The supplier doesn't deliver on time. The quality isn't good enough. If you state that they have to meet those requirements and they don't, you need to have a predefined remedy that says, if this happens, these are the actions you as the supplier need to take to make me whole again. And so we need to have predefined remedies. Almost no procurement departments that I find are good at doing this. Then we need to have something, this is my own term I created, results-oriented success metrics. Why do I call it that instead of success metrics? Because I find too many procurement departments are measuring the wrong thing. They say, oh, we were done 100% on time. Well, what was it you delivered? Was it of value or was it not? And so 100% on time isn't necessarily a very good success metric if what you delivered didn't produce performance results. And so performance results are what we want to measure. We need to have in our negotiations, in our tenders, in our contracts, the results-oriented success metrics that are focused on measuring the results of the purchase. Then we need to have a procurement mission that's overarching, and we need to be communicating this to suppliers. It tells them, once again, not what we're trying to buy, but it tells them, where are we at? Why are we even buying these things? What is it that we're trying to accomplish? What are the things that we want to resolve? What problems are we having today? And it's the lack of this that creates many problems. And do you want to know what the most dangerous words are in procurement that we're using every day? The words that are killing us? The words are, failure to comply will result in bid disqualification. That, ladies and gentlemen, is why that 64-kilometer city got all of those 125 light bulbs. The supplier very much knew that this may or may not solve the problem, but the bid, when they were asked, why didn't you tell us? They said, because the bid you sent out said failure to comply will result in bid disqualification. If you include the procurement mission, it precludes and give the supplier a voice to come back and give you feedback on what your bid says and what the specs are. It precludes, or at least it gives the supplier a voice and something to look at to understand whether or not you're even asking for the right things. And I'm warning you, your standard contract does not contain any of these four, not one. And if you get 3 of them right, the stool will fall. You need all 4. The only way you can do this is to have good contract negotiators inside your company who are looking at these things. And I'd like to comment on something. Our profession is spending a lot of time lately talking about SRM, supplier relationship management. Why? Because sales has customer relationship management, CRM, which makes a lot of sense for them. And then our profession is saying, well, if they have CRM, we must have SRM. And I see seminars on this, books on this, people speaking about it, webinars on this. All of this needs to go away, in my experience, and in my opinion, because the objective is not supplier relationship management. If every delivery is late, if the manufacturing lines are down because you're not getting product, is it okay to go to the CEO and say, don't worry, I have a great relationship with the supplier? That's not the end objective. The end objective is performance results. And so what I care about is SPM, Supplier Performance Management. We need to have a relationship with the suppliers. SRM has a role, but it's a part of SPM. SPM is where we want to get to. And so what's some of the benefits of making this shift? End users and procurement will now have a common goal. We have a big problem in procurement today because we're viewed by the business units as pushing our agenda onto them. And they don't like that. All the other businesses can issue edicts. Human resources can say, starting Monday, this is the new policy. Accounting can say, starting Monday, you'll do things this way. Finance can say, starting Monday, you're doing this way. Procurement cannot. We just need to embrace that. That's the reality. It does not work issuing edicts. Well, now, instead of focusing on our processes, our policies, we're focusing on what the end user wants to accomplish. That is the only way for end users to engage you, to want to work with you, and to bring you in for early engagement, because suddenly you are working towards their objectives and they don't perceive you as an opportunistic group trying to achieve your objectives. This is the secret right here. You will never get early engagement with business units and with end users until you move towards their objectives instead of yours. And then your organizational productivity will dramatically improve. And that's what I work with companies on. It's the same as hiring another 50% of employees, because you get your workforce out of spending 50 to 90% of every day on unplanned activities that came about because they put contracts in place for goods and services instead of performance results. The time freed up on the back end when you put a contract for performance results dramatically increases. And then supplier performance management becomes preventative. Instead of spending time putting fires and putting out fires, instead of having even a good contract that says what to do when a fire starts, instead it becomes preventative because you write the contract so that the problems and the performance issues never take place to begin with. And then these performance metrics can be used to make smart cost decisions, which is our next section. Because if you do not have a mission, and you do not have a mission of the procurement for the end user, not for you, and if you don't have supporting measurable performance metrics, you might negotiate out the wrong costs. You need to have a criteria by which to take these costs out. Your performance metrics and your mission represents that criteria. So now we're moving to driving design for TCO. This is really another topic that I consult and train on. I try not to focus on things where there's many good people and many good organizations already doing a lot of good work. I'm focusing on areas where I see companies not spending any time. And so this is yet another critical topic I need all of you as chief purchasing officers and senior directors inside of your companies to help drive. So I have an urgent notice I'd like to convey, and that urgent notice is we live in a world where you keep giving new cost savings target every year to your people. I need you to save this much. I need you to save more. Here's your new cost savings target. Here's the stretch goal. And this is good. Keep doing it. In fact, be more aggressive about it. However, your people, if they're like the people in all the other companies I keep going to, are trying to find these savings in squeezing suppliers. And if you're squeezing suppliers, then you're just focusing on this little thing called profit there. All things being equal, when you ask a supplier, give me a better price, what they hear is, make less profit so I can report more cost savings. That's what they hear you saying. Now that's okay, keep doing that, don't stop. But look at how much is in that cost category. That is where the money is, ladies and gentlemen. And so where I work with companies, I spend 0% of my time on teaching people and consulting on how to compress supplier profit. I don't care much about compressing supplier profit. I care about getting to that black space where all the money is. And when you compress supplier profit, you will never have an eager dance partner. No supplier is excited. But when you collaborate with a supplier to compress costs, the right costs, not the wrong ones, to take costs out of the equation, out of the supply chain, that makes the solution more nimble and effective, you will have a very eager dance partner in the supplier. And this is extremely important. And so here's what I want you to know. This is yet again one of those very important slides. Over the years, my research and my practice has showed that every time the end user gives you the scope of work or the specification, on average, there's 18% cost savings to be found that have been lost forever because you're already accepting what they've provided you. You've received the scope of work and specification and you're saying, I'll go buy it. There's on average 18% cost that doesn't need to be there, and it's too late if you follow a serial process. If they're handing it off to you and you take it and run, it's already too late. You have lost that 18% opportunity. And ask yourselves, how often are you getting 18% cost savings in negotiations where you compress supplier profit? I bet it's not very often. And this is in addition to what you can negotiate there. This is before negotiations even start. All negotiations start internal, if you don't know, before they go external. There's money in both places. And so there's a four-pronged approach that I use, and it's comprised of these simple things. One is reuse, which means reusing existing technology, existing idea, existing specifications, existing suppliers, existing components. The next one is simplification. There's a very famous French author, historian, pilot, and he said the most beautiful thing. He said, perfection is not achieved when there is nothing left to add. He said, perfection is achieved when there is nothing left to take away. And that is exactly what we should be doing in procurement. Not coaching our end users to try and make their specifications or scope of work more comprehensive, more bells and whistles, more features. We should be saying, how simple can we make this and still have it achieve your objectives? And then standardization as opposed to customization, because you can make some wonderful things out of standard ingredients. And then supplier innovation, which I view very differently as innovation coming from within, from our end users. Typically, innovation that comes from within is a risky idea that nobody's ever done before for a problem that's already been solved many times. When a supplier provides innovation, they're giving you something that they've seen work in the marketplace or they've been doing, but it's new to you. So it becomes an innovation, but it comes without the risks, and it's proven, and you shift the risk to the supplier for its success. I'll give you an example from right here in Turkey. There was a company that was manufacturing turbine engines, and these turbine engines were using a lot of oxygen tubes, many, many meters of oxygen tubes, thousands and thousands and thousands of meters, hundreds of thousands. They were buying 0.9995 pure, 0.995 pure oxygen tubes, and they were paying $310 a foot, so about $930 a meter. And there's only one company in the world that produces it, and it's in Germany. And they were buying so much of this, and then suddenly the German company couldn't provide any more oxygen tubes for the moment. They were out of capacity. And suddenly the turbine company here in Turkey was in big trouble. What do we do? And they said, well, can we use 995 that has a lesser grade? And so they decided, let's go talk to the supplier. They talked to the supplier and said, can we use 995 for our application? And do you know what the supplier said? We don't even know what you're using this for. You never told us. That means that it was a goods and services purchase, because when you buy performance results, you're telling the supplier what you use it for and what you're trying to accomplish, and they help you. They said, we don't even know what you're using it for. So they showed them the schematics and how they're using it, and the supplier said, you can use 995 for this application. That's fine. Well, guess what? 995, only one company in Germany. 995 is available everywhere, including down the street from this Turkish supplier for $10 a foot. So they went from $310 a foot down to $10 a foot very, very easily. What happened? They were focused on buying goods and services instead of performance results. If they were focusing on buying performance results, they would have found out from the beginning that 995 would have worked. This is 97% cost savings, ladies and gentlemen. You can never achieve that in negotiations. There was a fruit company, and their dried fruit division had very low profit margins. And in looking at their costs, it became clear that there was a category called master packaging. 5% cost was going to master packaging. And then the question arose, what is master packaging? What is it? And well, it turns out you have all these dried fruit packages, and then they were putting it inside this big container that's it doesn't look like this is just a drawing, but a big container, and they call that master packaging. Well, once they finally, after years and years of doing this, finally went out to see who in the supply chain is getting pleased by this master packaging, because they assume this wonderful experience that they're spending 5% of their revenue on this beautiful experience that somebody gets so excited to see it and it adds to the consumer value. Well, it turns out who was getting it is some sweaty guy in the warehouse. That's the only person who would see it on the customer side. And he or she would get it, and they tear off the master packaging, throw it over their shoulder in the trash, and then take the dried fruit and put it out where consumers see it. Nobody who was opening their wallet was seeing this master packaging. And this was going on for years and years. And in fact, somebody inside the company got an award for this master packaging, big award and recognition. Nobody actually even paid attention to see, does this add value in the supply chain? And so this 5% was able to be surgically removed from the supply chain. This is why I call it design for TCO, which is designing the demand that the end user is articulating for TCO. This is much easier to achieve than it is to squeeze a supplier for 5% cost savings. Now I'll share with you my favorite example of all time. I won't say what airport this is, but I go through it all the time. And please pay attention. What we have here is, you can see there's a ticket counter over here, and it's very tall. And you can see it's tall because it has the tram there. And then this tram goes down to the gates, and you see the airplanes. Everybody sees that? This is a pretty new airport. Now, if I go to the next slide, now you see it from another direction. Now you can see there's the same ticket counter, and over here is very tall. You remember that. So this goes down at an angle, but now you can see it's S-shaped. Does everybody see that? And once again, you see all the airplanes there. Well, going through this airport all the time, I was wondering something, because I go to airports all over the world. Every time I get on a tram, you see there's that tram right here. that goes down to the gates. Every time I go on a tram in an airport, I can see that I'm passing airport building space, that if I didn't get on the tram, I would be walking. But this one passes over dirt in an empty land. And I thought, why am I getting on a tram? I wouldn't be walking on this dirt. Why am I doing this? It doesn't make sense. And I kept researching, and in the internet, I could not find anything. Everybody was talking about what a beautiful high-tech tram this is. Then one day, I found myself in a conversation with the second in command of this entire brand new airport. And I asked him, first of all, I said, why is the building so tall in the ticket counter, but it only has one floor? Because to me, that means cost. It means it's expensive to build, expensive to heat. And he said, well, you know, the airport director wanted to leave a legacy. And the greatest legacy these days is to put a cathedral ceiling in it. And I said, okay, I guess I can understand. And then, of course, you have the biggest escalator ever going up to the top so you can get into that tram. It's almost like a roller coaster when you get in this tram. And so you go all the way up to the top. And so I asked him, then what about the tram? Why does this have a tram? It passes open space. I'm not passing building space. And he started looking at the ground and shaking his head. So I expected for him to tell me a master plan as to why they needed the tram. Instead, he's just shaking his head and looking at the ground. And I said, what is it? He said, I told the airport director we don't need a tram. Now look carefully. You see how it's shaped down there, the gates? Everyone watch. He said, we can just turn it and flip it this way and attach it directly. Then we won't need a tram. But the airport director said, no. Whoops. The airport director said, no. The best airports in the world have a tram, and we will have a tram. And he said, but Portland Airport in Oregon has been rated the #1 airport in America for 6 years in a row, and it doesn't have a tram. And he said, he said, the best airports in the world have a tram, and we will have a tram. And he said, but if we do it this way, then I can put more, if I have extra staff here, I can send them here to help them. And if I have extra staff here, I can send them here to help them. And then that way I don't have to overstaff both functions. Once again, he said, the best airports in the world have a tram, and we will have a tram. I asked him, what did it cost to put this tram in place? He said it turned a $500 million airport into a $1 billion airport. It doubled the cost of the airport. Now, if you're the procurement person in charge, you can never negotiate away 50%. This is a design for TCO problem. The design itself was not demand for cost. Now they're having tremendous problems trying to overcome. If you look at the USS Virginia Department of Defense, this is a nuclear submarine, and historically they all had custom designs, but they were all doing the same exact thing. They were designing each one from scratch. And so you had all these parts that were nearly identical, but each one was actually custom. So each one was completely unique. You had to have separate training, separate parts, separate inventory, separate everything. And what happened was they finally decided we have to standardize. This is again a design for TCO thing. So they said, we're going to spend $27 million standardizing all the components that go into making a nuclear submarine so that all nuclear submarines are now the same and no longer custom. And by spending $27 million, they saved over $800 million in the cost of making nuclear submarines. They reduced the number of parts by 60%. It also reduced time to market, because now you're making something standard, you can make it much faster. And then also the crew, the people on board, were ready much faster because every single one was exactly the same. These are the benefits of driving design for TCO. And I want you to know, none of this is happening on the supplier side. This is internal negotiations to streamline the cost before you ever go out to bid. If you remember, we used to have a plane called the Concorde that was extremely fast, but it had a sonic boom and it was too expensive. Look for a plane company that's going to be coming out. There's already been millions of dollars invested in this. It's called the Boom. And the Boom is going to do what the Concorde did. It'll go, for instance, from New York to London in 3.5 hours. But the Concorde, they stopped it because although it was fast, it was extremely expensive, $20,000 round trip. It used lots of fuel, had a very loud boom, and it was extremely expensive to maintain. Well, this boom manufacturers decided we can fix this problem. And so what they did was they're doing reuse. Remember, that's one of my design for TCO things. Is they're doing reuse to take parts from other existing planes. Why do we need to invent our new parts? Why does something that is a custom product in the end, why can it not be comprised of standard components? The answer is it can be comprised of standard components. And they took many, many different types of reused components, and then now it allows it, look for this to start. In a few years here, it allows this plane to do the same route for what seems to be about 25 to 50% of the cost of flying the Concorde, and it'll fly even faster. But it's going to reuse existing parts, and reuse provides risk assurance as well, because you don't want something that's flying for the first time. You want parts, components, everything that are proven, that are used before, and you know they're going to work. And so what we have, the word innovation is a word that makes all of us happy. We love innovation. It's what makes Turkey great. It's what makes every great company be how good and be how the best that they can be in the marketplace. The problem is that's marketplace innovation that gives you a competitive advantage in revenue and in the supply chain and with customers and with your competition. There's another kind of innovation that's happening every single day that's killing you. And that kind of innovation is the end user sits at their desks and invents a way to solve a problem that's already been solved 100,000 times before in industry. And so then you have a custom spec or a custom scope of work. And then you have suppliers who have already got standard approaches that they've developed and standard products and standard methodologies that work. And you force them to drop that and to incur all sorts of new costs to do it your unproven way. And when I say your unproven way, I mean what your end users came up with. And so this kind of innovation, things that do not influence the marketplace, results in unproven solutions. It shifts the risk of performance from the supplier to you because it's no longer the supplier's idea. Now it's your idea. And then it increases costs, of course, because you're building something from scratch with the supplier. That can be services too. It increases time to market because it takes longer to do something custom. And it rarely solves the problem better than an existing solution. And so I see this as being not very beneficial. We need to drive these things, standardization, reuse, simplification, and supplier innovation with our customers. It's the grand illusion that's what's happening now. What are some of the benefits of making this TCO shift? Your cost-saving strategies stop having an exclusive focus on supplier profit compression. We have to stop this habit of always going to suppliers and saying, give me a better price, give me a better price. Let me say it differently. We have to stop this being the only way we get better prices. We cannot just rely on supplier profit compression exclusively. We can also achieve tremendous cost savings before we ever negotiate by looking at the design of the demand and collaborating to see where we can take it out. Then suppliers can and usually do play a very vital role in driving these changes. And if you remember the example with the security cameras in the high-tech city, in the very touristic city, it was the supplier that helped achieve 90% savings. Providers, procurement, human resources, finance, accounting, payroll, and legal. And then these organizations aren't funded very much. They're not given a lot of money. They're given just enough to operate because they're viewed as cost centers. Then we have over here sales, marketing, research, development, manufacturing. These companies, these organizations are given whatever they need to be successful because they're viewed as revenue generators and profit generators. We need to get out of this fishbowl, and we need to get into the other fishbowl, and we need to be perceived as value-added centers of profit for this organization, or for all of our organizations. So with that, I want to thank you very, very much. I'm proud.
Thank you very much for your
Yes, okay. Thank you very much.
Evet, çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Kendisiyle ilerleyen dakikalarda, ilerleyen saatlerde tekrar birlikte olacağız.